Yo, what's going on, guys? Today, I'll be ranking every single card in Clash Royale from the very worst to the very best one. Let me know in the comment section down below whether you guys agree or disagree with each one of my rankings. So guys, kicking it off as card number 118, the very worst card in Clash Royale, we have the Barbarian Hut. It's so bad, it gets full countered by a 4 Elixir Fireball. Need I say more? Next up at number 117, we have the Goblin Hut. The Goblin Hut honestly is also just very bad. It gets wrecked by Earthquake, by Poison, and I feel like Supercell just really doesn't want spawners to be good in Clash Royale. They kind of purposely keep them on the weak side because they create such a toxic playstyle. At number 116, guys, we have the Clone Spell. The Clone Spell is kind of a long-forgotten card. It used to be pretty decent in stuff like Lava Hound, and Lava Hound is actually good right now, but there's so many spells to counter, like Poison, Arrows, Tornado, even like the Goblinstein ability. At number 115, guys, we have the Three Musketeers. Three Musketeers are just so easily counterable these days. Stuff like a Delivery could counter most of them. If you Fireball really quickly, you could counter basically the whole 3M for 4 Elixir. And stuff like Ghost is also really good versus them. Moving on to number 114, we have the Mirror. Now, the Mirror is a very interesting card. It's honestly very bad right now and in general, but the one time it's very broken is when a broken card is out. Like, say there's Phoenix in its prime. Remember Phoenix in its prime? Mirror was very broken during that time. So if there is a very broken card in the meta, Mirror can just be used to play more of that broken card, and therefore it makes Mirror actually good in the meta sometimes. But unfortunately for Mirror, the broken card right now is mostly just the Goblinstein and some evolutions which can't be mirrored. Taking the number 113 spot, we have the Rascals. Rascals are just very bad due to the fact that so many people have Log and Arrows now. Even after the Radius nerf to the Arrows, I feel like people are still going to run it quite often, and Rascals just get wrecked by spells. Now for the number 112 card in Clash Royale, we have the Furnace. Furnace is kind of just similar to the rest of the spawners, honestly, and it's also completely useless if your opponent has either Dagger Duchess or the Cannoneer Tower. The lucky number 111 card, guys, has to be the Minion Horde. Minion Horde actually used to be decent in some Giant and Mortar decks, but now absolutely everybody has like Arrows, they have Poison, Fireball, just so many cheap ways to counter Minion Horde, even the Goblinstein ability. Now for card number 110, guys, we have the Witch. Witch used to actually be a kind of decent card. It even got a buff not too long ago, but I feel like it just got really replaced in Giant Graveyard. It used to be somewhat viable in Giant Graveyard, but now stuff like Bowler and Night Witch is just 10 times better than Witch. Taking the number 109 spot, we have Skeleton Army. Skeleton Army might be a kind of controversial card. I think a lot of mid-ladder players think it's really good, but basically everyone has like a Rage, a Zap, Arrows, Log, and especially when you play like a Rage on it, you counter it for a +1 Elixir trade, and you Rage up all of your troops that are nearby, so Skarmy is just so much worse compared to safer options like Guards and Goblin Gang. The 108th worst card in Clash Royale has to be the Void. I know Void actually got a decent buff to where now it kind of just will take stuff down a bit faster. Like it's, I don't know how you call it exactly. Like those lightning strikes go a little bit quicker now in the Void, but I think that doesn't really make much of a difference at all. It's still really easy to block the Void, and it just does way less damage than it used to. The buff is just not really going to be enough. Now guys, I should mention, in this tier list today, we're not going to be considering evolutions, so we'll be ranking each of these cards without considering how their evolutions actually are, so we're just going to be ranking the raw cards. Now, moving on to number 107, guys, we have the Wizard. Wizard, if I included its evolution, it actually still wouldn't be very good because Evo Wizard kind of sucks right now, but even the normal Wizard is just really not used in anything. I mean, I can't think of one deck that actually plays it. That's how bad it is right now. It just is not functional compared to stuff like a Musketeer. Surprisingly, at spot number 106, we have the Tombstone. Tombstone used to actually be a pretty decent card in stuff like Splash Yard and, you know, stuff like Lava Hound as well, but there has been one very special card, the Goblin Cage, that has completely replaced Tombstone in just about every single deck, so it's not good right now. It gets countered so easily by spells as well. At spot number 105, we have the Elite Barbarians. Elite Barbarians used to be kind of viable in bridge spam and whatnot, but now they're just way too easily counterable by all these quick cycle decks. Even Beatdown decks can kind of deal with them pretty easily, and there's so many better options than E-Barbs. How the mighty have fallen, man. At number 104, we have the Giant Skeleton. It kind of pains me to see this because Giant Skeleton used to be so good, but nowadays there's just no use for it. It just doesn't counter anything, literally. We have the Barbarians at spot number 103. Barbarians are just not the card they used to be. They used to be very good, especially with the evolution and stuff, but anyways, we're not even counting the evolutions today. But guys, nowadays, they're not even good in Lava Hound. Like in Lava Hound, you 10 times rather have a Valkyrie or you know, like a Goblin Cage, literally anything else except of Barbarians. They're just very, very fragile and inefficient and just don't counter the meta very well. At number 102, we have the Suspicious Bush. Suspicious Bush is just not a good card because it gets some value on offense, but literally zero value on defense. And that's really all there is to it compared to Wall Breakers. You just can't get much value out of it. We have Goblin Curse at number 101. I think a lot of people overrate Goblin Curse because it really is not that hard to counter. Like, you know, you could spend 4 Elixir going for like a Curse Zap to turn a few Skeletons into Goblins, but all your opponent has to do is just log it and they get a free +2 trade. So it's really only a good card if you really surprise your opponent with it when they have like a terrible cycle or just low Elixir, but in general it's pretty bad. Right on the dot at number 100, we have the Battle Ram. Battle Ram is just a card that kind of fell off over time. It used to be pretty decent in stuff like Pekka Bridge Spam, but nowadays Pekka Bridge Spam fell off so badly after the Pekka nerf, and Battle Ram is really nowhere to be seen. I mean, once in a while you might face a random Bridge Spam deck that plays no Pekka in it and just has like Cannon Cart and stuff, but Battle Ram is just usually the worst part about that deck. Like, every other card in that deck is better than Battle Ram. It's so easy to counter it. At number 99, we have the Trash Can on Wheels. Man, the Trash Can on Wheels actually really fell off this season. I'm not even sure what the main reason for that is. I feel like it just doesn't really beat many of the meta decks. Ever since Goblinstein came out, it seems like Goblinstein is so good for countering Sparky because you just basically will play like a cannon to counter the giant that they play, and then you just go for the Goblinstein on the Sparky and like whatever, the mini Pekka and stuff like that, and you just ability, it kills everything. Number 98 has to be the Executioner. Executioner is just a card that nobody really likes anymore. You know, Balloon decks sometimes used to use it, but now they don't. They have Musketeer and stuff like that, and Hog Executioner is basically nowhere to be seen. Executioner is just a very inefficient card in this game. Coming in at number 97, we have the Skeleton Barrel. The Skeleton Barrel is kind of similar to the Suspicious Bush, where it's just like one of those weird cards that doesn't really seem to fit in many decks, and like, sure, you could play it in stuff like Mega Knight and things like that, but it's really not hard to counter. You could just counter it with basically any air card like Archers or a Firecracker, or just play a small spell onto it. Very easy to stop, and you could get your king up off of it too with a Tornado. Card number 96, the Elixir Pump used to actually be a very good card, but a lot of the decks that played it just fell off, and it did get a nerf itself as well. Like, it's not a terrible card right now, but there's a good amount of Earthquake, like Pig's Earthquake, you know, Hog Earthquake, and I feel like even decks that don't have good spells against Pump, they can just punish it so easily, so it doesn't even matter. It's just hard to play Pump right now. At number 95, we have the Goblin Demolisher, which is actually kind of surprising, because Goblin Demolisher doesn't feel like that bad of a card, but if you think about it, literally no deck plays it, and I think the reason why is because Bomber's just 10 times better. You basically get a Goblin Demolisher for 2 less Elixir, because it feels like the Goblin Demolisher never really connects to the tower anymore anyways with the second form, ever since they nerfed it a few times. For card number 94, we have the Battle Healer. Battle Healer is basically not used at all right now. It used to be very good with E-Golem, but even nowadays, E-Golem actually dropped the Battle Healer, surprisingly, and now the only deck you ever will face it in sometimes is Golem, but obviously Golem is not really the most popular deck right now, and even a lot of Golem decks don't choose to run the Battle Healer. It's just a very hard card to get value out of, except with that spawn heal. Wow, man, what a fall. At number 93, we have the Pekka. Pekka used to be basically the very best card in Clash Royale, but then they completely nerfed its range to basically have to hug a card in order to actually hit it, so that's really all there is to it. Now it's just incredibly easy for any cycle deck to counter with like a Cannon plus Skeletons, Musketeer plus Skeletons. You could do anything, and it will counter a Pekka. I think it's pretty fair to rate the Xbow as number 92. Xbow really just hasn't been the same ever since, I would say, like 2021. I feel like after 2021, it just fell off so badly. And like, there's obviously still a few players using it at top ladder, but you know, with Goblinstein and all these different tanks being around, it's so hard to run it. Now for number 91, we have the Archers. Archers are basically solely used in Xbow, so I feel like it kind of makes sense to put them hand in hand because, yeah, literally no other deck uses Archers except Xbow. So yeah, they're just not good right now, but the only nice thing about them is that you can split them. Even so, arrows just tend to wreck them. At number 90, we have the Elixir Golem. Elixir Golem actually does kind of randomly peak in and out of the meta. I feel like sometimes it'll be really good up here, but then other times it'll just fall down here. And right now, it's just not being played at all. I think Evo Cannon definitely had something to do with that because, yeah, these Evo Cannon cycle decks just destroy Elixir Golem. At number 89, we have the Inferno Tower. Inferno Tower is just not good in this meta. It doesn't really counter what you need it to counter these days. Like, there's a lot of cycle decks that Inferno Tower just gets completely wrecked by, so you kind of have to have Cannon in most decks, especially with the you know, evolution cannon, you kind of have to run that over a non-evolved Inferno Tower, and it doesn't even counter Beatdown that well half the time. Like, you could play it and they have Golem or something, but all they have to do is just Lightning, and you're cooked. Coming in at number 98, no, 88, we have the, coming in at number 88, we have the Freeze. The freeze spell is honestly pretty bad right now. I know a lot of people will say that there's like Lumberloon freeze and stuff like that, but nobody really plays that, at least not competitively. It's very rare to face it these days, especially with the Rune Giant nerf. I feel like it'll be used even less, and there is, you know, the occasional Graveyard freeze player, but it's really just not a great card. It works once in a while for certain players, kind of like off-meta players running off-meta decks and stuff like that, but it's just only good for the surprise factor, really. At number 87, we have the Electro Dragon. Now, the evolved Electro Dragon is very broken, guys, don't get me wrong, but the normal E-Drag is just so useless now, and Lightning is going to be everywhere, so it's bad. I think Mega Minion has to be rated as number 86. It's kind of just in a decent spot, but there's so many cards better than it, like Inferno Dragon and a lot of other air cards. At number 85, we have the Baby Dragon. I thought Baby Dragon would be quite a bit better after the buff, but it seems like even Splash Yard doesn't want to use it still. It's just not really useful in this meta. The Ice Golem has actually rose a few spots to number 84. I feel like it was always ranked a little bit lower before, but it's not a bad card in stuff like Balloon now, so it kind of gets the job done, although it's pretty off-meta. Mother Witch is ranked at spot number 83. The Mother Witch is just a card that it doesn't really work too well this meta because there's not a crazy amount of bait anymore. I feel like there was a lot of bait, but people playing Duchess and stuff kind of made bait fall off, so therefore Mother Witch has fallen off too. At number 82, we have the Wall Breakers. The Wall Breakers kind of have also fallen off quite a bit as well. They used to be sometimes used with like Minor Magic Archer or some Recruits decks. They still can be used in Recruits very rarely, but in Minor decks with Magic Archer and stuff, people just prefer to have an Ice Spirit there for better defense, so Wall Breakers kind of just get outshined, especially without the evolution. And now at number 81, we have the Golden Knight, aka Juicy J, the Clash Royale streamer. I'm just playing. But yeah, guys, the Golden Knight, it's just not that useful. It used to be kind of good in stuff like Electro Giant, but now it would rather have Bowler instead usually, and it's just very inconsistent ever since the nerfs it got. Exactly at number 80, we have the Mega Knight. Mega Knight is really just very reliant on the evolution right now, so that's really the only thing that actually makes top players use it, or really most players in the game use it. Now, I know over-leveled and mid-ladder people will use it, but you can't really say that it's good just because it destroys people when it's over-leveled, because basically any card would do that. For card number 75, I have to go for the Zap. The Zap is just a card that has slowly fallen off ever since they started releasing more and more small spells into the game. It was pretty good before back in the day, but now we have like Rage, we have Snowball, we have Arrows, we have Log, so many other options, and pretty much all of those options I just listed are better than Zap, especially without the Evo. It's really only decent in stuff like Lava Hound. For number 78, we have the Bomb Tower. The Bomb Tower is just outshined by Cannon in every single way. That's all there is to it. At number 77, we have the Goblin Barrel. The Goblin Barrel is just so bad without the evolution. Like, with the Evo, it's actually a very good card, but without the Evo, it just gets countered by any spell every single time. So half of the time the barrels, like the barrel deck, they have to have a Princess to be their win condition, or just a Rocket. Now, accompanying the barrel, guys, we have the Princess at number 76. The Princess did actually get a pretty interesting change to where now it takes a bit longer to deploy, but it does have a faster first attack time, I believe, so it's going to be harder to get damage with a Bridge Princess, but you could still definitely do it against players that aren't that good at reacting quickly. And it'll be a bit better on defense, so I think it'll be pretty much the same as before, maybe even slightly weaker, to be honest. At spot number 75, we have the Hidden Tesla. The Tesla also, once again, does get outshined by the Cannon, and even the evolution of the Tesla gets outshined by the evolution of the Cannon, if we were actually going to talk about evolutions at all, which we actually won't today anyways, but yeah. Tesla just gets outclassed. It does defend air, which Cannon doesn't do, but the Cannon decks can just easily add a little air card extra to defend Lava Hound and stuff. Honestly, this might be even a little bit too generous, but I'm going to say minions are number 74. They could honestly be a lot worse because there's arrows absolutely everywhere, and there's no point to run them over stuff like bats. Moving on to card number 73, we have the Mini Pekka. I don't even know why I'm being so generous to the Mini Pekka, because it really is not that good right now, but there is one giant Rage deck that kind of dominates with it, so that's really the only reason I'm putting it up here. It does do high damage, and it can really catch your opponents off guard with the fast movement speed. We have Goblin Machine at number 72. The Goblin Machine is a pretty interesting card that I think a lot of people think is complete garbage, but it genuinely is actually pretty strong in those just Mega Knight, Rune Giant, Rage decks. Now, the Rune Giant got a pretty big nerf, so I think those decks are going to be a lot weaker, but the Rune Giant genuinely does fit so well with the Goblin Machine sometimes, and I feel like it just, like the Goblin Machine just fits pretty well in these broken decks at times, like E-Golem and stuff like that. At number 71, we have the Cannon Cart. Cannon Cart was actually very strong for a short period when Mortar was super meta towards the time of the 20-win challenge, but nowadays it's pretty bad. It got a little HP nerf, and it's just a lot easier to kill, and Mortar also kind of fell out of the meta. On the dot at number 70, we have the Baseball Tiny, aka the Heal Spirit. I think it's actually pretty good right now. It's a pretty underrated card. It actually works so well in stuff like Bridge Spam and Giant decks, where if you don't predict it with your log, sometimes it can just completely win the opponent the game if it connects at the right time. Number 69 might be a little bit generous for the Mortar, but I think it's really not a bad card. The Evolution Mortar is actually what sometimes carries it, so without the Evolution, I don't think it's that good, but number 69 seems kind of fair. It gets the job done, it has a good amount of HP, and it could definitely break through stuff. It's just that Cannon seems to counter it pretty easily. Golem has actually risen quite a bit, all the way to number 68. The reason why I put Golem up here is that ever since Cage came out and became really broken recently, I feel like it just allowed these Golem decks to be so much more popular, because Golem actually has been quite popular in the last month or so. I've been seeing a lot more Golem decks on ladder recently, and it does a decent job, especially ever since Pekka kind of disappeared and there's no Inferno Tower, really. At number 67, we have the Skeleton King. Skeleton King really just isn't that good like it used to be. I feel like there's no huge swarms going around like Skarmy, or, you know, there's not that much Goblin Gang anymore either, so it's hard to get that much value out of its ability these days. Moving up quite a bit, we do have the Electro Wizard at number 66. I think the E-Wiz actually will be pretty good now after the buff. I mean, not that good, but I feel like quite a few decks can start to run it, maybe some Beatdown decks especially, because it can actually now one-shot Spirits with the damage buff that it got. We have the Mighty Miner nice and snug at number 65. Honestly, I think Mighty Miner is actually quite good right now. It works really well with the Rune Giant too, and it fits quite well in this meta. The only reason why it's not higher up on the list is because no other champion can be that good when you have the Goblinstein, which is used in so many decks, and you can't play more than one champion in a deck. Zapping their way to number 64, we have the Zappies. Zappies really aren't that versatile right now. I was kind of considering putting them a little bit lower, but they were played in Recruits a lot recently, and Recruits have to be one of the better decks in the game right now, so I think it's kind of fair that they're up here. They're very good on defense, since not many people are actually playing Fireball. For spot number 63, we have the Berserker. The Berserker really is not that bad of a card. I feel like people thought it was really trash at first, and they were kind of right, but it definitely has started to make a little bit of a comeback, and I mean, not a comeback, but like just a breakthrough, I guess I could say, in some decks. It's been pretty good with the Rune Giant too, but you know, with the Rune Giant nerf, I think the Berserker isn't going to be as good as it was just a couple weeks ago. So it's decent. It could fit in certain decks, but it's not the best. We have Royal Recruits at number 62. I think the Recruits are really broken with the evolution, but we're ranking stuff without the evolution. So without the evolution, I honestly think Recruits would actually be pretty mid. Like, I remember Recruits used to be super hard to defend back in the day, but now that I think about it, like going back, if Recruits were still normal like they used to be, that would be like 10 times easier to beat these filthy Recruits players. We have this Giant Snowball at number 61. I think this Snowball is a pretty decent spell right now. Honestly, one of the better balanced small spells in the game. Like, it works in Balloon, it works in Giant Graveyard, sometimes a random deck here and there. It's not very popular, not that amazing, but it gets the job done in the decks it's used in. On the spot at number 60, we have the Lumberjack. Now, if I was including evolutions, this would probably be at number 1, but without the evolution, Lumberjack is really not that amazing. It's just good in stuff like, you know, Golem decks and kind of like the off-meta Ram Rider deck here and there. Some random things like Balloon that not many people play, like those Balloon freeze decks. Not many people actually play that these days, though, so it's just okay. It got a buff a while back, which makes it not bad. The Firecracker seems pretty fitting to me at number 59. It's very good in Hog EQ right now, but literally no other deck in the game seems to ever run it aside from Hog EQ. Now, I know in mid-ladder people love to play it. I feel like why they love to play it in mid-ladder is because people always miss spells against it, and if they don't have the right spell against it, it just gets infinite value sometimes against beatdown decks, but it's not really the best in general because you could just give your opponent the free king activation half the time as well. I decided to put the Little Prince at number 58. The Little Prince, I was saying, was the worst champion before, but I changed my mind, man. It's actually pretty good in minor rocket decks nowadays. Muhammad Light has been playing these minor rocket decks with Little Prince, and it seems to get so much value. Also, the Rune Giant works great with it too, so it's a solid card, and it's just a very cheap way to get the 3-card cycle going for you that champions allow you to have. Coming in at number 57, we have the Fire Spirit. The Fire Spirit is quite a balanced card right now. It's just like a good card, I feel like, after the buff it got to its range. But Ice Spirit is simply so much better, and that's really all there is to it. At number 56, we have the Goblin Giant. The Goblin Giant is really not that remarkable on its own, like, you know, just the plain old Goblin Giant. It gets some value, and, you know, it was pretty good with Rune Giant and stuff, but I feel like after the nerf, it's going to definitely affect decks like Goblin Giant. I know I keep on mentioning Rune Giant a lot, but Rune Giant, guys, was genuinely changing the entire meta, so, you know, yeah, Goblin Giant, I mean, it had a very strong period when Rune Giant was first released, and then it was still kind of good after the nerf, but now with the other nerf that Rune Giant is now having, I think it's just not that remarkable. I'd rather have a Giant most of the time. We have the Ram Rider at number 55. I feel like the Ram Rider was quite overrated for some time. People thought it was really broken, but I think the only reason they thought that was because Pekka paired so well with it. But without the Pekka being broken, Ram Rider seems just to be a fairly average win condition, maybe a little bit above average, but it's definitely nothing broken. At number 54, we have the Monk. The Monk actually did make a little bit of a comeback. I wasn't really seeing Monk for quite some time, but last season there were actually a lot of players playing RG Monk in particular, and the Monk was actually doing a great job. I think it became quite a bit better because Pekka got nerfed. Like before, if you play into a Pekka, it just gets wrecked, but now people don't have stuff like that anymore in their decks usually, so Monk actually does a great job to reflect cannons, musketeers, and quite a few other things as well. At spot number 53, we have the Delivery. The Delivery is really not that versatile. It's pretty much only used in Royal Hogs Earthquake right now, but it genuinely is a very good card. It counters stuff like flying machines very well. It counters lava pups. It counters, you know, skeleton dragons. It's a very solid card, but not very versatile. I did decide to put the Phoenix at number 52. The Phoenix really is only used in Electro Giant these days, but Electro Giant actually has made a little bit of a comeback ever since the buff it got. I've been seeing it quite a bit more recently, especially with the Bowler and stuff like that, and the Phoenix is pretty much always the go-to support card for it. It just gets the job done, even though it's nothing too impressive. Kind of the middle of the pack at number 51, we have the Bats. The Bats have kind of fallen off a little bit. I feel like they were pretty good in stuff like Mega Knight, but I have not really seen Mega Knight that much recently, despite the Pekka nerf, and just the decks that Bats are used in really aren't popular right now, even though the Bats themselves are decent. Right at number 50, we have the Bandit. The Bandit was very, very good in the Pekka meta, but now a lot of the decks that Bandit was being played in have kind of fallen down a little bit, so Bandit is just a decent card. It's, you know, just a little bit above average. It gets some great values. Sometimes it kind of dashes everywhere, but other times you can just shut it down with, like, skeletons very easily. At number 49, we have the Hunter. I think the Hunter's actually quite good right now. It's very good in RG, and it's not really versatile at all, but just RG is actually a very solid deck right now, and Hunter just gets the job done. That's really all there is to it. I'm honestly not 100% sure on this one, but I would say at number 48, Rune Giant is a good option, because the Rune Giant was definitely one of the top cards in the game for a period, but now it got nerfed to where when it enchants a card, if the Rune Giant then dies after it enchants a card, the enchant will only last for 5 seconds on that card after the Rune Giant dies. So it's definitely a little bit weaker, but it still has a lot of HP and still can enchant 2 cards, and I think it's pretty solid. Moving on to number 47, we have the Electro Giant. Electro Giant has kind of just came back into the meta ever since the buff it got, to where now it doesn't get pulled super far by buildings like it used to, so I feel like that really just helps it, but the only thing keeping it from being better is the fact that Cannon is a great counter to it and is absolutely everywhere. We have the Rocket at number 46. The Rocket's really not that popular right now, but there's a minor little Prince Rocket deck that's pretty solid. There's sometimes Logbait, you know, sometimes some random decks like Xbow or Hog Execution are not really the most popular decks in the meta, but I would say Rocket's just overall solid right now. At number 45, we have the Dart Goblin. Now, surprisingly, everyone was always saying how broken the Evo Dart Goblin was, but it seems like most bait players these days actually don't choose to use the Evo Dart Goblin. They rather have like an Evo Valkyrie or an Evo Barrel, something like that, and they don't even use Evo Dart Goblin. Just the Dart Goblin itself is very good. It's very pressury. It has such a quick attack speed, and it also moves so quickly, and it can just snipe things so good that when you play it in the middle of the map, it kind of forces out a spell, or it just gets infinite value, and it keeps on moving back and forth like a firecracker sometimes. Alright guys, moving on to number 44, we have the Hog Rider. Hog Rider is pretty consistent, pretty good, and I think some people might think it should be ranked higher, but Hog Rider definitely struggles a lot right now with all the Splash Yard, all these Magic Archer, Tornado building decks, so it's not that easy to play Hog in this meta. For number 43, we have the Fisherman. Fisherman was actually extremely broken a few months back with like the Goblin Giant Pekka decks, Ram Rider Pekka decks, and RG of course, but now it's pretty much just used in RG. maybe a couple off-meta decks here and there, and it just gets the job done, even though it's not particularly broken after the nerf it got. Moving on to number 42, we have the Goblin Drill. Goblin Drill actually is pretty good right now. It works quite well with the Lumberjack and Bats and like these spammy cards. There was one really popular deck with it last season, and I feel like you can always run it with stuff like Firecracker, Tornado, and just like that kind of control version of Goblin Drill. It just is a very luck-based card that can sometimes get you crazy damage. At number 41, we have the Dark Prince. I was thinking it should go a lot lower, but I feel like last season, Giant Double Prince was absolutely dominating everywhere in the meta, so I think it's actually quite good right now. It counters Goblin Drill. It counters just a lot of stuff pretty well. It just is a very safe card to play, and you could get quite good pressure out of it. It also got a nice little buff recently to the time it takes for it to charge. On the spot at number 40, we have the Musketeer. Musketeer has definitely made a little bit of a rise recently. I mean, it got a little bit of a buff, and it just started to fit quite well in stuff like Balloon. I mean, I've even been seeing it quite a bit in stuff like Giant Graveyard as well, and, you know, obviously 2.6 Hog, which isn't that meta, but it definitely works these days. Taking spot number 39, we have the Goblin Gang. Goblin Gang seems to just be a very underrated card, I feel like. Not many people really think it's that good, but it's really good in Logbait, it's really good in some of these Goblin Drill spam decks with the Lumberjack and, you know, Mega Knight randomly here and there, different stuff. It just works quite well. It applies so much pressure ever since it got the 3rd Spear Goblin. For number 38, we have the Night Witch. The Night Witch just got so much better recently. It was used in Giant Graveyard, and man, Giant Graveyard feels so good right now, guys. Giant Graveyard is so back right now, unfortunately. Much to my, I don't know. I don't know what to say. I don't know the word for it, but I'm unhappy about Giant Graveyard being back, and it's all thanks to Night Witch. It's also good in Golem too, and it's just so annoying. I would say that Electro Spirit does belong at number 37 on this list. The Electro Spirit is extremely broken in Royal Giant. Besides that, you can run it in stuff like Xbow and, you know, just a random deck here and there. It's not that versatile compared to an Ice Spirit, but it gets the job done when you need a deck that, when you need like a card that can kind of deal with swarms a little bit, but you don't want to put a whole nother spell on your deck. You want to have something that you could kind of cycle with a little bit better. Coming in at number 36, we have the Earthquake. The Earthquake is actually pretty good right now. I mean, it's used in both Royal Hogs Earthquake and Hog Earthquake, two decks which are both honestly pretty good right now, and, you know, they're just quite consistently decent decks in the meta, and Earthquake is a good reason why they're good. Next up are the Skeleton Dragons at number 35. The Skeleton Dragons have just felt really good ever since the buff they got to their HP, and now they're just a vital part of Lava Hound, of, you know, just like these weird recruit spam decks sometimes, and, you know, just a bunch of random things, a bunch of random toxic, annoying off-meta decks especially, and it's just hard to kill them these days. We unfortunately do have the Bowler at number 34. The Bowler is very good in Giant Graveyard, as I was mentioning a few times earlier. It's very good in E-Giant right now as well, and it really just seems to carry both of those decks. It always makes its way to the tower for no reason, and it's even good in just stuff like Graveyard Freeze, the off-meta Lumberloon Freeze deck sometimes. It's very good right now. It just always finds a way to heat seek its Bowler missiles to the tower. Guys, I honestly might be underrating the Ghost, but I'm going to say it's number 33. The Ghost is very good in RG, and the only reason I'm not putting it higher up is because I feel like there have been recently a few other cards that have sort of made their way to combat the Ghost, but it's still very good, very versatile, and applies so much pressure. You have the Balloon at number 32. The Balloon is really good in Lavaloon, obviously, and there have been just a lot of Balloon players coming out of nowhere playing this Balloon Musketeer deck, and sometimes a Balloon Inferno Dragon Goblin Cage deck with like Mega Man and stuff. It's actually been pretty good recently. It just always gets that death damage, if not a huge Balloon connection that just adds up so much over time. At number 31, we have the Fireball. The Fireball has always just been a very solid spell. It's used in sometimes an RG deck here and there, used in Expo, and not really a crazy amount else. I mean, it could always be used in other decks, but oftentimes people will choose to play stuff like Lightning over it. But it gets the job done, and that's really all there is to it. Prince has actually moved its way up quite a few spots all the way to number 30 now. The Prince has been so popular recently, guys, especially in these giant beatdown decks, which have just taken the meta by storm recently. And Prince is a big reason why it's so hard to stop it now. It just feels like it charges so quickly, and people don't really seem to even realize how broken Prince is right now. I feel like ever since that one charge-up buff it got a while ago, people just have never realized that it actually goes so quick right now. At number 29, we have the Spear Goblins, just a very pesky card, always really good in stuff like Minor Magic Archer, and You know, you could just throw them in a bunch of other decks too, like Goblin Drill and just some bait decks, and they always seem to get on the tower no matter where you play your cards to distract them. We got the Valkyrie at card number 28. The Valkyrie is just very good in Lava Hound, and it works in Hog Executioner, and a lot of defensive decks just love to have it. It's overall just a card that always gets the job done. We have the Ice Mage at number 27. It just feels so good right now, and stuff like Splash Art especially, it really carries that type of deck, and you can always throw it in Mortar, in a few different decks too, and it just feels so hard to kill because, I mean, it does that to Fireball, but nobody runs Fireball, so you always have to overspend on it with like a Lightning, or sometimes a Poison does kill it as well. We have the Flying Machine at number 26. The Flying Machine is just really broken in recruits right now. I feel like it really carries that deck, and also Lava Hound has been running it a lot recently too. There's just kind of a lack of spells to kill it, I feel like, because stuff like Piggies, for example, they used to be able to kill it with like a Delivery Fire Spirit, but nowadays they have Ice Spirit, so Flying Machine can be literally invincible because it doesn't die to Delivery Ice Spirit. At number 25, we have the Magic Archer. It is genuinely impossible to get this off of your tower, especially paired with the Tornado. Minor Magic Archer is the most annoying deck in the game. Nerf the card, please. Now for number 24, we do have the Royal Giant. I feel like the Royal Giant is just really solid right now with the Lightning and stuff. The Lightning is so broken right now, and Lightning is kind of just a picture-perfect spell to pair with the RG. It's really hard to get it off your tower, especially when they get like one down in the back and then a second one at the bridge in the opposite lane. It's almost impossible to stop both of them at the same time, so I feel like RG is one of the safer win conditions to play right now. At number 23, we do have the Rileys, aka the Goblins. They're actually pretty solid right now. They were kind of bad for a while, just overshadowed by stuff like Skeletons, but nowadays they're actually pretty solid in these minor decks, and you can always just throw them in like a Hog deck or some random thing, and they work really well. They definitely have some benefits compared to Skeletons, like countering Graveyard better. At number 22, we have the Bomber. The Bomber is just a very safe card right now to play. It works well in Giant, it works well in some random Graveyard decks sometimes, and Goblin Drill. You could pretty much just throw it in anything. It's so cheap that you can never really go wrong with it, and it pretty much always gets the job done against Swarm cards especially. Man oh man is this card pesky, guys. At number 21, we have the Goblin Cage. The Goblin Cage is so annoying right now, guys. It's so good in Recruits, it's so good in Golem, it's so good in Graveyard, it's just good in everything, and literally everything right now, guys, and it really carries those decks to be so good in the meta right now, too. It just so broken, the fact that not only does it work really good as a defensive building, but you also get an amazing, you get, yeah, just a huge counter push using it every single time, which is so pesky. Moving on to number 20, we have the Knight. The Knight is pretty solid right now. You can definitely use it in quite a few decks, but the only reason I'm not putting it higher is because Goblinstein is just a better option in a lot of decks. So for number 19, we have the Guards. The Guards are basically a better version of Skeleton Army. They're basically Skeleton Army, except they're spell resistant, effectively. Like, they don't die to arrows, they take a while to die to stuff like poison, you can't zap them, and they still do a ton of damage, so they just really get the job done, and they're really one of the best cycle cards out there. At spot number 18, we have the Rage Spell. The Rage Spell could be a little bit higher up if this were the Goblin Giant meta, but since Goblin Giant fell down a little bit, I think this spot is pretty good for it. It still does work super well with stuff like the normal Giant and just those toxic beatdown decks that you never like to face. The Rage works super well in those ones, and yeah, it's mainly just Giant. It just speeds up your Princes, speeds up your Dark Prince, speeds up your Giant too, and makes it almost impossible to stop sometimes. At number 17, we have the Royal Hogs. The Royal Hogs are actually really good right now. I think they're basically a better Hog Rider for the most part. Like, you have obviously the really broken Royal Hogs Earthquake deck, you have the Evo Cannon in there, which makes it really good, and just a bunch of other stuff. But you also have the Recruits Royal Hogs deck as well, which is also super broken, so they're really versatile, really good, and there's not a lot of Bomb Tower to counter them, or Mega Knight. The Barbarian Barrel is very good right now for Splash Yard, for sometimes Electro Giant, Golem, stuff like that. It's used quite a bit by beatdown decks. It's really the spell of choice in quite a few beatdown decks, but just not quite as versatile as some of the other spells that we're going to have coming soon. And guys, at number 15, we do have the Archer Queen. The Archer Queen is actually very good right now. It got a nerf a little while back to, I don't really remember what it was, to be honest. It might have been like the ability cooldown, I believe, is what it was. But it's still very good right now. You know, even if there's like a lot of lightning in the meta, you just play it way up high on the map, and they can't lightning the queen in the tower. So if they go for the lightning up high, they just get a free -1 trade. And if not, you just queen ability and it kills everything, basically. It's so good. Taking spot number 14 by storm, we have the Inferno Dragon. Inferno Dragon is just great right now to counter the meta. It's amazing when paired with certain strong decks like Lava Hound and things like that. And yeah, it just counters other Lava Hound decks well, it counters Giant well. It can even counter Goblin Steins if you tank for the Goblin Doctor, or if the monster and the Doctor get kind of spread apart, so it really does it all. It's great on offense sometimes too, if it even gets a bit of HP and it's close to the tower. We have the big fella, the Giant, at number 13. The Giant is just so good out of nowhere. I think the main reason why is because a lot of people have started to play stuff like Dagger Duchess, and people have started to also realize that with these heavy punish cards being really good in the meta, they can just play the Giant with that and get that to tank for all of those heavy punish cards, making them just get close to the tower, and from there, you're just gonna not be able to do much, and there's no Pekka around either to stop the Giant players. So Giant is so broken, Giant Graveyard is back too, and it's so good. Moving on to number 12, we have the Poison Spell. The Poison Spell I maybe could have ranked a little bit higher, but it's mainly just used in Splash Yard these days. I feel like a lot of the minor decks prefer to have like the Magic Archer Tornado combo, so that's why I decided not to put it any higher on the list. Now for number 11, we have the Lava Hound. The Lava Hound just seems to keep on getting better and better, guys. Like, people always say, oh, it's just the support cards in Lava Hound, that's what makes it so good. But then, guys, it was broken with Evo Barbs, it was broken with Void, it was broken with Chef, it was broken with Rune Giant. It just pairs well with every single good card that ever comes out in Clash Royale, so I think the Lava Hound is the problem. At number 10, we have the Ice Spirit. The Ice Spirit just really the spirit of choice in every single cycle deck, and as we all know, cycle decks love to have a spirit in there, so everyone uses Ice Spirit. It resets, you know, Inferno Dragons, Ram Riders, and just gives you the time to defend and get more cards down to counter whatever your opponent is throwing at you. I think the 9th best card in Clash Royale has to be the Tornado. The Tornado just keeps on getting better and better. I feel like it's so good right now in Splash Yard, Electro Giant, you know, even the random Xbow player here and there. There's definitely a lot more I'm forgetting. I feel like there's, yeah, quite a few more decks, like, yeah, Magic Archer decks, Magic Archer Minor decks. Man, I can't even hold up 4 fingers properly. I don't know what's happening to my hand here, but you guys get the point. It's just so good right now, so versatile, gets you those king activations, and makes it really hard to break through a deck when they have Tornado. This one is a little bit interesting, guys, but I'm going to say the number 8 card in Clash Royale is the Cannon. Now, Cannon did get a nerf to its hit speed, a 0.1 second nerf to its hit speed, so it shoots 0.1 seconds slower now, but I feel like it's still just so good right now. It's still probably going to be the building of choice by far, because it still has the same damage, even though it shoots a little bit slower, and it just gets the job done, and it's only 3 Elixir, which is such a nice thing. Now, making our way to number 7, guys, we have the Miner. The Miner just seems to kind of fade in and out of the meta a little bit. Like, sometimes it's really good, sometimes it kind of falls out a little bit when there's stuff like Goblin Drill competing with it a lot, but right now Miner is actually so good. Like, the Miner Magic Archer deck is incredibly broken. Obviously there's not that much Miner Poison compared to back in the day, but there still is some Miner Poison decks going around, and like, you know, even Miner Mortar decks. Sometimes they throw Miner in a Giant deck or a Lava Hound deck. Honestly, maybe I could have even rated Miner a little bit higher, but it's just very good right now, and it's been good for so long as well. I'm honestly not 100% sure about this one, guys, but I'm going to say Arrows are the 6th best card in Clash Royale, even after the nerf. They did get a radius nerf to where now instead of having a 4-tile radius, they have a 3.5-tile radius, but I feel like before the Arrows radius was so huge anyways that even with this nerf, it's probably still going to have the range it needs to hit just about everything, but it's going to be kind of funny to see Lava Hound players like start missing my firecrackers and stuff like that. Alright guys, making our way into the top 5, we have the Log. Now the Log did get quite a significant Crown Tower damage nerf, but I feel like it's kind of even because the Arrows also got a nerf, so I think Log is probably going to be a little bit better than Arrows now, maybe, because the Log, it did get a Crown Tower damage nerf, but it's a little bit of a smaller nerf compared to the Arrows, since it didn't actually affect the way it's played, really. So I think Log is just very versatile, very good. It always has been. It doesn't really feel oppressive or anything like that. It just kind of balances stuff out, kind of keeps stuff in check, and it's just the go-to spell for half the decks in the game. Alright guys, now we're in the top 4. We have the Lightning Spell. I think the Lightning Spell is going to be so good right now, guys, because it's going to be such a good counter to all the Hunters going around, you know, all the Witches, all the Wizards. Like, even for people not at top ladder, I feel like it's so good. Like, it counters, you know, Witch, Wizard, it counters Goblin Stein. It counters basically anything in the meta. It can also kill cannons. Obviously, that is a negative trade, but it just gets rid of basically anything. So if you want to have, like, an E-Giant deck or a Golem deck, you just play Lightning, and it will clear out the path for you straight to the tower pretty much every single time. And now, guys, at number 3, we have the Graveyard. I feel like the Graveyard is just so incredibly broken right now, and with the changes, guys, the balance changes, it might be even better. And yeah, Splash is just absolutely everywhere right now. I don't know what happened to it. I feel like the defense just got so broken ever since Goblin Stein came out, and obviously Goblin Cage has become really good too. But also the Graveyard itself is incredibly broken. Like, the Graveyard players always say, oh, it's just the support cards, but the Graveyard itself is extremely broken, extremely luck-based, so you can never properly defend it because you don't know where the skeletons are going to spawn. Now guys, at number 2, we have the skeletons. The skeletons, I mean, I don't think they need a nerf. I don't think they're broken, but they're just so good. Like, you can use it in basically any single deck in the game. Like, even graveyard decks use it nowadays. Like, the splasher decks, they actually kind of started to play skeletons over stuff like Knight, and they're just so good, so versatile. Just a great distraction for one Elixir. Nothing more to say. Alright guys, we need a drum roll for number 1. At number 1, the very best card in Clash Royale, Goblinstein. I didn't really intend for Goblinstein to be number 1, but honestly, I feel like it probably is. I mean, even after all the nerfs it's gotten, it's still so good in Splash Art, so good in Hog Riders, so good in Minor decks, and probably quite a few other things too, like some bridge spam decks and a bunch of stuff like that. Despite all the nerfs, it is just everywhere, like even in Mortar 2, and yeah, very great card. So guys, let me know in the comment section down below what you guys thought of this list. Comment down below whether you guys agreed with me or not. And yeah, have a great day guys, thank you for watching. Bye.